All
All
right, it's
right,
12:30. It's
It's
12:30.
Okay.
Comedy half hour can begin.
Welcome to Ask Sympraxis, where you can ask Sympraxis anything. We hope you have questions.
Yes, we really do.
We have a couple people who are playing hooky today. Todd's on vacation. I don't know what Mike's doing, but he's not here.
Mike's playing golf.
I was going to say, Mike is playing golf. Let's be honest.
All right. So there's that. So we'll do our best, and if there are questions that those two could answer, we'll just make up answers instead.
Make them look bad.
So that's Emily, good judge. Just want to leave that.
Yeah.
There for a second. Lots of questions. Lots of questions.
Yep. I like it.
All right. So our like we said, our preference is you've got lots of interesting random questions. Otherwise, we have some interesting stuff we've learned if there's a big silence that we need to fill up. But really, this is a half an hour for you as attendees. So please let us know if you have questions. You can raise your hand. You can turn on your mic. You can jump up and down and in front of the camera, whatever it is that you think is going to get our attention.
Caleb. Yeah. Yay. And we have the questions from Twitter too, but Caleb has his hand. Todd Clint, get out of the chat room. Okay. Caleb has his hand.
No, go away, Todd.
He's here.
So, question on modern pages and connected web parts filtering. So back in the good old days of Classic, we had the ability to do queries on the or pass queries on the string for filtering, and say I want to filter all the document library web parts that I have on this page by a value. I'm missing that terribly. We have lots of solutions in our enterprise that use that and rely on that. And I really don't want to write 150 views because I can't store a view on a page anymore. Anybody got a creative solution? I'm open to SPFX. I'm open to
So
anything.
you want it to be dynamic. It's not a pre-canned filter.
Right. So like we have situations where we have solutions for our internal customers where we have, a page for every state today and 3 web parts on that page. And the only differentiator between those web parts on page 1 and page 2 is the state that they're filtering for, which was fine when you could store the view definition in the page. But now that we can't do that anymore, now I'm looking at, I got to do one states page that has the 3 web parts and somehow filter by state. And I want to be able to still have the navigation where I say, choose Alabama, and the page is automatically filtered for Alabama for them instead of having to put, a list of the states on the left in a web part and then use the connected web parts that Microsoft's providing out of the box.
Well, I know my answer would be the PNP modern search web parts, which is a slightly different experience. It would be that you would have the refiners on the left, but that way you could let the user choose their state. There's not sort of one destination page for Alabama. There's a page that you can then filter down. But those web parts are really, really handy for letting users actively filter stuff. I don't have an answer for an out of the box, something similar to the filter query string approach. Anybody else?
Does the modern search web parts accept query strings as filters?
Yes. So you could do K equals whatever.
That's where I was going to go with that as the closest thing before you have to start coding. I can tell you I've been solving that modern wise for other clients by building single page SharePoint framework solutions. So we have a client, they have hundreds of locations. That might be even thousands of locations. And we have a locations SharePoint framework solution for them that's on as a single app part page that then takes the query string parameter. So the navigation, Todd in the chat, that takes the query string parameter that can then filter the web part, then knows how to filter itself for that thing. So I would agree with Mark. It's either that you would use the modern search web parts and use like a query string parameter filter on them, or you write a SharePoint framework solution for like a single page that gives you a nice page view of the solution.
I was hoping to use, like predefined views in document web parts, and then I'm okay with the SPFX web part, but can I send from my custom SPFX web part, send that query or that filter criteria? Because right now it's connect one view to another, and pick an item out of a view. That's the out of the box experience.
Yeah. Well, I guess the other question would be, what are those three web parts? Are they three different content types? Are they three different libraries? What are the sources of those?
Three views on the same library, showing different content types or different metadata tagged, different criteria that are the same filter criteria except for the state.
Yeah. So you can actually have more than one search result web part on. So I'm sticking with PNP Modern Search again. You can have more than one search results web part on the page, and they can be configured differently, but use the same filters. Okay. So that would let you show different slices of the same content. If you wanted to get fancier, you can also use handlebar templates to determine exactly what's shown and exactly what way. So you can get very creative with that. But there are some out of the box views. There's a standard list of documents. There are cards. Okay. There are some pretty decent out of the box layouts, and then you can take those layouts and you can like, if you like the card one but you want to change it a little bit, you can copy that handlebar template, customize it to display things in a different way, and deploy that, or make that change across all three of those web parts if you needed to. The other nice thing you can do is you can actually put the markup for that that handlebar template in a central location and reference it. So if you wanted to use that in other places, you could.
Yep. Okay. Cool. Thanks.
Hey, the dynamic data feature in SharePoint Framework was supposed to do exactly that for it.
Yes, I was just going to comment on that. But that, I don't know if there are, and maybe somebody else in the call does, but if there's any out of the box web parts that support the dynamic data. That's the part of that I don't know. But if there are, then yes, you could have a SharePoint Framework web part using the dynamic data feature that could feed other out of the box web parts that support dynamic data. I just don't know the answer to that question. Does anybody else?
The last I looked, I tried doing that with the list view web part, and the list view web part you can't feed a filter into. You can provide data out of, but not send data into it.
Right.
That was like a year looked at that.
Yeah, that's the thing I think that is missing, is that, so you could personally, instead of building, one big sort of web part, you could build like 3 or 4 or 5 web parts using dynamic data to make them all communicate with each other, and also maybe potentially communicate with the query string parameters. But there's just no benefit to that in this scenario. There's other scenarios where that would make a ton of sense, but in this scenario, that doesn't feel like it makes a ton of sense. Also, the caveat of, and I don't know if they fixed this, but at one point they had done some optimization of page loading that actually broke that dynamic data feature, in that they've stopped loading web parts that are below the fold or not invisible not visually on the screen. And so the dynamic data stuff was getting broken because the web parts weren't actually getting loaded, and then they would never pick up the dynamic data. So there is that caveat, and I do not know. I have not heard if it's been fixed.
But if you're pulling from the query string, that shouldn't be an issue.
It isn't. I'm talking about the dynamic data feature of web parts talking to each other. Different thing.
Oh,
yep.
Okay.
Yep.
I love the PNP Modern Search web parts for stuff like this, though, because they've done all the work for you. You don't have to write any specific code unless you want to do a handlebars template, which is really nice.
Right.
Yep. Depends on what skills you're bringing to the table.
So Mike, and he just put it down. Mike had his hand raised, Mike Dixon. And does anybody else?
Caleb had his hand up. But
he did. He was first.
Too. Yeah,
oh,
that
Mike,
was Caleb. Sorry.
I still have my hand up.
Mike.
Oh, okay. That was
Hi.
weird, Mike. It went down and then it went back up again. Oop, and it's doing it again. Oh, no, wait a second. That's a nice Teams bug. Love it. If I
I was gonna
hover
say-
over your name in the attendees, it goes away. Okay.
Teams isn't buggy at all, though.
No. Perfect. Perfect product.
I don't know about you guys, but like 1 out of 4 times that I share my screen, the app crashes entirely.
Nice.
That's something.
Yeah, that's
That's
awesome.
you've got the bonus build.
Yeah,
All right, you had a question, Mike.
I
Go
have.
for it.
Oh my God, so many questions. So I'd like to start with some Dataverse stuff. I'd consider myself relatively, I'd say intermediate in Power Apps. And I'm starting to get into Power Apps for Teams because my clients don't like to pay for advanced licensing. So, cheap is good. And there seems to be in Power Apps for Teams just enough different to drive you absolutely mad. And there's a lot of techniques that I have used before that I'm trying to use in Power Apps for Teams that just don't work. And I was curious if other people are seeing that and just kind of what the general thoughts are on the differences between Power Apps for Teams versus I don't even know what to call it, regular Power Apps, Power Apps Pro, Power Apps for Enterprise. What do we call this?
Power
It doesn't
Apps for
make any
Dummies.
sense.
I think it's safe to say that the Sympraxians have not done anything with Dataverse. Am I mistaken?
You are not.
The closest I got was watching Shane present at the Sharepoint at the New Hampshire user group.
Oh, so you're our expert.
So I'm the
Go ahead
expert.
and
I
answer
guess.
the question. Does anyone else on the call have an answer for Mike?
I live in Shane's video feeds, so I'm familiar with that stuff.
Mike, it just hasn't come up with our clients. It's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Microsoft is so Teams first, Teams focused, Teams everything. And
Yeah.
I gotta say, our client base is not really that. There's a good mix of Teams in place, but I don't think we really have very many clients who are trying to turn Teams into application, or the Teams application into their own applications in a sense.
I
Yeah,
just don't
so-
think the maturity is there. That was
Yeah.
what I was going to say for that.
So for me, the majority of it is it's a licensing dodge.
Right. Well,
That's
I mean,
really the big driver, because what we're largely doing is we're going to build out in Teams and then share to everyone.
Well, we've built
that.
we've built quite a few Power Apps that use SharePoint lists as if they are database tables, and somebody's going to
Oh yeah.
this and say don't do that and hit me with the spike in my heart and stuff. But if you can build your lists in an intelligent way, and you've got 3 to 5 of them that interdepend, I think that's a totally valid model.
Yeah.
You take on the onus of doing all that work in Power Apps, but the licensing works there too. There's no cost to that approach either, other than having E1 or E5 or whatever.
You, Mike, you might go check out anything that Paul Culmsey or his daughter have posted. They're out of, Mark knows them way better than I do, but
Perth.
out of Perth, Australia. And he actually gave me a verbal tutorial on Dataverse for Teams once, and most of it went over my head because I hadn't used it, and I'm the type of person who has to use something to understand it fully. So I hadn't used it, but he was telling me all the pros and all the cons and all the details. And so
that's awesome.
I know he's super versed in it. So you might either, he's also, I think he's still an MVP. Anyway, he's an MVP in that area, and as his daughter, and they do a lot of work on that and speak about it. So you might go explore anything he's posted on it, or any videos he might have done, or whatever.
How do you spell that last name?
Culmsee, I want to say, but I'll find him and post
That
it
is
in the
correct.
chat.
Okay.
So we've just we've got pretty much bupkis for you.
Okay. Cool. Thanks.
You want to ask more questions about Dataverse? Because
no.
Chris. All right. So we'll give someone else the floor. If you have more questions, feel free to put your hand back up. Krista has a question. Have you encountered any privacy-related issues with public or private content delivery networks in SharePoint?
Yep. So I have the answer to this, and we have a slide for this. Let's see. It's slide, Mark Anderson, 9.
There it is.
Okay. Now I have to close this view.
Did you ask Krista to ask this question?
I think she's the person who asked this before, and so there's not enough content here to really do a whole talk on it, so I put the answer here because as a backup if nobody had any questions, kind of thing. So, Chris, the deal with the public and the private CDNs is that, so the public is exactly what it sounds like. It is basically that once you enable, and it's all a PowerShell thing, and since Todd's not here, we won't go into it, but I do have the commands down below that you can look into, and we do have a link in the end of the deck where the article is linked to. But basically what happens is when you turn the public or private CDN on, you end up defining, and there are some default ones, but you end up defining origins. And so those origins are the things that SharePoint then syncs to that CDN endpoint. Now, if you turn the public CDN on, then all the origins that are shared that are synced with the CDN are available anonymously. So from a security perspective, yes, you don't want to put things in origins that you haven't enabled as a public CDN that you consider private, because they are technical. I mean, there is some obscurity to that. The URLs are very complicated and odd looking and have GUIDs in them and stuff, but they are publicly available anonymously. Now that can be a boon. This is a good solution for if you're doing SharePoint framework solutions and you want to have external guest users be in sites, have external access to sites that have SharePoint framework solutions on them. A big problem that it's often run into is that those users do not have access to the tenant app catalog, which is just a fancy SharePoint site collection. And since they're not in that tenant app catalog, don't have permissions to it, they don't have read access, they can't read the source code for your SharePoint framework solution, and thereby it doesn't work for them. And this is an often asked issue. The answer to that is to make sure that you have the public CDN turned on, and that you have at least the origin for your tenant app catalog set up as a public origin, so that then those users, when they go to a page that has a SharePoint framework solution on it, it'll reach out through the public CDN for that content, and they will get it because it has anonymous access. Now, if you set up a private CDN, that actually is secure. So when when a user requests a piece of content that's on a private CDN, a unique token is issued them, and that unique token provides security trimming to the content that they're requesting. So it checks that token, understands who they are, and validates that they actually do and should have access to that piece of content before it gives it back to them. So the security issue with the private CDN is the same as SharePoint. It's just giving a faster source, because the CDN by definition brings your content closer to your user, and so you'll have a faster experience versus wherever that content is actually stored in whatever data center it's stored in. So that is the answer to the public or private CDN question.
Thank you, Julie. That's great. It's my concern really is if there's some way to accidentally set up access for the public CDN, that somebody on a random site somewhere can upload their private information and it ends up in the public CDN. That's just my concern, if there's an accidental way that can happen, or how that works.
No, but it takes planning. So when you get the link, and I'll go find it and share it, but when you go to the link, it talks about planning for that. So, there's some default origins, and I've listed them here on the slide. So the master page library, the style library, and the client-side assets for public are by default for every site collection available. You can remove that. When you set it up, you don't have to set up the defaults. You can say, I only want these site collections and these folders in those site collections. Yeah, thank you, Mark. To be the ones that are available on the public CDN. So like you could just set up your tenant app catalog. It's the, if anybody is interested in doing that, if that's the client side assets folder. So you would put in the URL plus the / client side assets as your public, or one of the origins on your public CDN endpoint to make sure that your SharePoint framework solutions are available publicly. But then it would, only be that. Nothing else in your tenant would be shared. So it's a matter of not using those wildcards and not accepting the defaults. So there is some planning and setup, and that document that we shared there does a very good job of explaining it, unlike almost most of Microsoft's documentation on things. That one is a very good one and does explain it pretty well.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
No problem.
I have a question for our audience. Is there really a Todd Flint attending, or is that Todd Clint trying to sneak in? I bet it's really a Todd Flint, isn't it?
I think it is.
You're going to make me come off speaker to respond to that?
Yeah, sure. Hi, Todd.
Hello, how are you guys?
We're good. Do you have a question? You have such an excellent name.
I don't today, other than where's Todd on vacation?
Is that an
He's in the
undisclosed
Ozarks.
location?
Undisclosed location. That's probably good for a call like this, yeah.
We have a question from Joy in the chat. Back to PnP search web parts. How are people dealing with the seeming redundancy of the presence of the Microsoft search box in addition to the PnP query box? Seems like a clunky experience to me, but I can't figure out a way around it.
You can, and I just haven't done it, so I don't remember exactly where the setting is, but you can wire up the top of the page search box so that the PnP modern search web parts respond to that.
Yeah.
So
it's a PowerShell command, and damn it, we don't have Todd, but I don't know what it is either.
There's a PowerShell command that can tell that box, the box at the top of the screen, how to behave. But I think also in the PnP modern search web parts, there's some setting. I could be wrong about this, but I think I'm right. It might have been in version 3. I think it's in version 4, that where you can accept whatever's in that from whatever the user types up there in the web parts that are on the page. So that makes it a little more seamless, I think. But it's a fair question. I think that in general the experiences that you build with those web parts are so robust that people are fine with using the search box that you give them that's wired into the page.
Julie, we got one for you.
Oh, sorry, I was
about
like
learning
searching
pathways.
for the end one.
Or Emily. It's about learning pathways.
Oh, let's see about learning pathways. We loaded. Sorry, go ahead.
So it's the question about Viva Learning versus learning pathways. You answered this one the other day, so I know you have the answer. So should you jump to Viva Learning, or should you use learning pathways and make
they
the site
are
attractive?
yes, so they are independent of one another. So Viva Learning will be able to has content available to be exposed in it. I have not been made available to see the preview of Viva Learning, so I don't have firsthand experience with it yet. But I am in close contact with people in the SharePoint org who do know, and the answer right now is that learning pathways will still be the recommended solution for building your own custom content that is then surfaced through Viva Learning. So, so they are two separate things, because Learning Pathways is a community project, and Viva Learning is a first-party product. But the answer will be that there will be some amount of integration ability so that you can expose your Learning Pathways content through Viva Learning.
I think the other question there is how do you make Learning Pathways look good? And maybe Benoit, you could explain what look good means to you. What would you change?
I'm not sure what that means, really.
It's, we can make it pop, but we have to make sure we make it pop in the right direction.
But to use it, we are limited to the web part that is made available to us, and there's not much layout option in there. It's only we have topics and categories, and there's not many ways to make it look good, to make it attractive to users, and if we want to do some searches in the content, we need to use the search in the web part, which is not that interesting, I think. But there's a way to make it look better.
So you're mainly talking, it sounds like you're mainly talking about the web part that you would use to embed content in another site usually. Besides, you're using learning pathways as the engine, but then you're embedding content in other sites. Is that the web part you're talking about?
But to use the learning pathways content, we need to use the web part.
Yep.
Yeah.
Browsing it, and it's quite limited. It's not looking that good. It's very simple.
If you had some really specific like things that you would want changed about it or abilities to configure it, I mean, I would highly recommend that you submit those to the Learning Pathways GitHub issue list. But I mean, it goes in any of the sections. It's section aware. I'm not quite sure what you're looking for exactly. So I think if you could sort of spell out some examples of how you would want it enhanced and submit those to the GitHub issues list for Learning Pathways, that might go a long way. Because I have never heard anyone ask for what you're looking for right now. So this is a new one for me.
Okay, thank you.
Do we have it? Yep. Emily, you probably have it handy. Could you pop that link into the? I got
chat?
It.
I was just doing it.
I'd say for now, with the way the Learning Pathways web part is, the imagery that you can put on the different categories and playlists is probably where you're going to have the most ability to really change that look and feel. And if you start using maybe some consistent iconography from something like Flycon, which I'll pop into the chat, that'll match the rest of SharePoint's layout. And then you can also choose different colors when you export them, so it matches your theme. And that might be a nice way to bring a little bit more pizzazz to your page.
Next question from Melissa is, do we know if accordions are coming to SharePoint Online? And the answer is a definitive yes. I don't know when. It's something that they announced, I think, at Ignite last year, or maybe even earlier than that.
It was 2
years ago. So yeah. It's one of those things that's been hovering around, and I think I've seen it in some screenshots. I just don't know if they're public or not. But I mean, it's definitely something that's coming. And I think if you want accordions, it's better to wait for that than to build something of your own unless you really, 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 really need it. There you go. Emily always has the right answer.
Can you back up a little bit and explain what an accordion is? Because I have visions of Weird Al in my head.
and that would make SharePoint a lot better. I'm definitely. So it's where you have content that expands and collapses. Usually you'll have like 4 or 5 or 6 or whatever number of sort of little panels, and as you click on them, they open up to expose more content. If you click on a different one, it closes the first one and opens the next one. It's a pretty common web, using a way to use web space better.
I also I saw Chris Kent do a demo in the community call a couple weeks back with using list formatting to get the accordion, so an expand and collapse list formatting as well. So I don't have a link to that immediately handy, but I can go look for that and see if I can grab it.
Emily, that image that you gave, that last column says June calendar year 2021. Is that the column that's when it's going to roll out?
Yes.
Yeah. So in theory, it's coming right now.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Who's next?
Well, we are at the 1 minute to the top of the hour.
Well, Todd Flynn has a question.
Well, let's try to handle that one then.
Yeah, well, Todd will be the last one. On the recent announcement.
Sorry for the timing.
Yep, no problem. Changing where permissions are managed for team-connected team sites. Any idea if it means okay. That one is incredibly unclear, and I've been trying to help wrestle it into some messaging that makes more sense. So Todd, if you were confused by that message center message, join a very large club.
Yeah, I figure we'll be talking about that in the days and weeks to come.
Yep. They're working on a simpler description. There were way too many words and they were trying to cover way too much in that announcement. And they used a bunch of terminology that had never been used before. And that was part of the confusion. So you will absolutely be able to have unique list library permissions in the sites that are behind those teams. The difference is mainly with private channels and the upcoming shared channels. So that was really what that message was about. And unfortunately, it was too confusing. So does that answer your question, or do you need more detail?
Absolutely. And I knew it was, a new topic that there's going to be more discussion on, and I really didn't mean to sneak it in the last minute. Sorry about that.
No, that's okay. No, it's a very confusing message. So
I think we should absolutely put a pin in that one for when it does become more clear, so that we could do a whole episode on that one thing, because it definitely could be. And I will be an attendee in that one because I am so confused by this. I'm like, I
sure. So you want us to do a session on something?
Yeah, so that I can learn it. Right.
All right.
Yeah. That's your job. Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Well, thanks everybody for coming. As you know, we're always interested in your questions. So if anything comes to mind after the fact, feel free to drop them in this discussion, and we'll try to keep an eye on it.
There were one or two Twitter questions which we didn't get to today. We will put them in the recap that we have that we put out next week about automated flows and dev tenants. So you'll have the links and the answers to those.
Yep.
And we should announce that next week we're canceled for vacation. It is the 4th of July week in the United States. And it just tends to be, we're all kind of doing stuff. And so we thought better to scratch that one. So we're going to skip that one and watch Twitter, watch our Sympraxis C Twitter account for what the next session will be. Well, it'll also be on LinkedIn and our Facebook page, et cetera, et cetera. But we will announce shortly what our next session will be in 4 weeks.
I need to plan a vacation. Awesome.
Very good. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Thanks for
coming.
Bye,
everybody. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.